Perhaps you've heard of internal family systems, or IFS. I encountered that idea about a year ago, and I found the concept intriguing. But what is IFS, and can it help us heal? Can it help us reveal the image of God within us? Hi, I'm Brandon, and I'd like to welcome you to the Crucible of Thought podcast. For the last few years, I've been rethinking a lot of my spiritual and political positions, and this podcast is where I explore the various topics and their impact on the church and the nation. This is episode number 150, and today I'm pleased to bring you an interview with Andy Luiten about internal family systems. When I started talking to Andy on BlueSky and discovered that he's a counselor that specializes in IFS, I really wanted to talk to him about it. So we spent some time today exploring the basics of IFS and how it can help us understand what's going on inside ourselves. And we wrap up with a bit of geeking out about the bands he plays in. So let's get into it. Well, good afternoon, Andy. I'm really happy to have a chance to talk to you again today. And we spoke last week or a couple weeks ago, and it really felt like recording something together would be fun. Mm-hmm. And so it's nice to have you on.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And I met you on BlueSky, and I've been following you for a while, looking at your commentary, and it seems like it was dear to my heart the way that you address things. So this is a good opportunity.
I appreciate that.
Let's start by having you tell a little bit about yourself, what your background is.
Yeah. Consolidating it. I grew up in the church, in a conservative evangelical church. And there were some like switching around of churches in there, but in the evangelical church pretty much through it all. And then kind of went into more of and it was still evangelical, but more into a Calvinist space, kind of after college. And then just kind of like slowly started exploring just a little bit further and then a little bit further, kind of authors that were, thinking about Christianity in different ways than I had been taught. And so, just kind of kept going down that, I guess you could call it a slippery slope. But I like where I ended up. So yeah, that's kind of my journey in a nutshell.
Where are you right now in your faith journey? What do you call yourself?
Yeah. I guess I would call myself, the closest thing would probably be a Christian universalist.
Okay.
So I don't necessarily hold exactly what any precise form of Christian universalism would be, but I know a lot about Jesus from what I've read and what I've been taught, and so he's kind of like home base spiritually for me. So
yeah, okay. I hold the same general position, I think, and just because of what I've watched happening in the culture and its use of the word Christian, I've kind of switched to kind of more referring to myself as a Jesus follower anytime I'm not talking to a fellow Christian. But I'm happy to adopt their language for a conversation, and I really feel like I'm beginning to understand Paul's thing about being whatever I need to be.
Yeah. I definitely. Yeah. Now that you say that, I don't know if Christian holds much weight as a noun for me either.
Yeah.
So maybe Jesus following universalist, that could work. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have a counseling practice, right? Can you tell me a bit about that and its history?
Yeah. So it's not my business, but I work at a place. Technically, it's in Glen Ellen, Illinois. I live in Indiana now because my wife and I moved here about 6 months ago, but I still work virtually at this place called the Mancio Center. And it's been a great place to be, and great. I've gotten great supervision there, and it's been a really good experience.
How long have you been doing this?
Being a counselor, it's a good question. You'll find that when I'm asked questions, it's like I have to think of the answer in real time, because even if somebody asks me like how old I am, it takes me a minute to remember. Yeah, so I've been a counselor. I graduated in the middle of the pandemic in 2020. So I've been a like graduated counselor for about 5 years, I guess.
So we're going to talk today a bit about internal family systems. And is that something where you graduated right into that kind of work, or was that something you've acquired over time?
Yeah, I felt fortunate. I got introduced to it while I was in graduate school. And it wasn't like a program for internal family systems, but it was something that was just kind of like mentioned. You learn about all these different theories of the mind and counseling when you're in grad school. And this was just one of them that I really gravitated towards.
Okay. So yeah, and one of the things I definitely did want to focus on with you is internal family systems, because it's something that I ran into for the first time with a friend of mine who's developing a spiritual direction business. And she led us through, as one of our sessions, she led us through some discussion of that. And it really made a lot of sense to me. And I thought I'd really like to understand that a bit better. So when I saw that with what you were doing, it made sense to talk about that directly.
Yeah, that was the way it felt for me too. When I first came across it, I was like, oh, wow, this makes a lot of sense. And then started trying it on myself and started getting some reactions that I was like, oh, wow, this is actually doing something.
So how would you explain in a nutshell, and we'll just call it IFS henceforth, how would you explain IFS to someone with no background in therapy or psychology?
Yeah, so IFS, or internal family systems, is a model of therapy that that sees the mind as multiple. And so multiplicity of mind is normal. And actually more and more of psychology is coming around to understanding this, that we think of ourselves, or in our Western culture, we often think of ourselves as a singular unit. But IFS sees us as, yes, a singular unit, but we are made up of multiple parts of us. And so that's kind of the base starting point of which IFS kind of starts to diverge from the way you might have thought of yourself before. And so, do you want me to go further into it now, or?
Well, so right away, I mean, from the things I grew up with when I was younger, I right away would have said, well, now we're talking about split personality or schizophrenia, which as a layperson who has no connection to psychology, those are scary things, you know.
Yeah.
This sounds like it's recognizing that it's built into all of us if we're willing to see it that way.
Yeah. And I actually found that really comforting. Because like split personality, you know, multiple personality disorder, the common terms that people probably know in the more broader culture, it was very scary to me, thinking about like, you know, oh, like what if I someday lose my mind or something like that, like before I had any training in psychology. And then so coming to find out that those who do have that, today it's called dissociative identity disorder. But those who do are not really experiencing something fundamentally different from what everybody else experiences. It's just the extremity of those, how differentiated those parts are from each other. So it's like if you have dissociative identity disorder, or my supervisor taught me this and I like it, dissociative identity response, because I don't like pathologizing. Okay. So it's a normal response to going through significant trauma. But everybody has parts, and then the stronger the boundaries or the barriers between the parts, the more they are, the less they are aware of each other. And so everybody has parts, and then the more trauma you go through, the more parts need to defend you and protect you from re-experiencing that trauma. And so the more and more rigid and severe their behaviors become. And then they build up these walls between each other and become like separate systems in themselves.
So just to echo what I think you're saying, that the things that we would normally think of as non-psychologists of split personality or schizophrenia or dissociative are pathological representations of the IFS understanding.
yes and no.
Okay.
So, well, maybe as I'm thinking about what you're saying, yeah, maybe. Just that I don't like to pathologize, but
Sure.
because really, like, it can create a sense of like shame of like, oh, I did this thing that like, but actually, yeah, you needed to do that thing. Your mind needed to do that thing in order to survive.
Okay. So pathology was the wrong word, but the idea was it's a extreme manifestation of. Is that a better way to put it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So, and we'll get more into this, but like all of the parts inside of us more or less have relationships with each other, and they can ally with each other. They can go to war with each other. That's why it's called internal family systems, because the guy who was discovering it was a family therapist. And then as he was discovering these parts, he started realizing, oh, these parts interact in the same way that families do. And so there's patterns that emerge when family members interact, and those same patterns can kind of be applied to our internal systems as well.
Okay, so let's talk more about parts. If we take it as an assumption that there's nothing wrong with having multiple parts, what are some common misconceptions other than that? Because people have heard of schizophrenia or whatever. What do people get wrong when you start talking about parts?
One common misdirection is to think some parts of me are good and some parts of me are bad. Actually, the creator of IFS wrote a book called No Bad Parts, because actually all of our parts have good intention. They are all trying to protect us from threats that they may have encountered in the past or are afraid that they might encounter again. And they kind of come up with solutions of how to avoid experiencing that pain again. And then those are the behaviors that sometimes we don't like. Really, it would be other parts of us don't like. But yeah, and so we can have this tendency to think like, oh, there's this bad part of me that does this bad thing, and that just kind of digs you further in and actually gets in the way of healing and growth.
Okay. So what are the different parts that are typically found? Are there more than just a few, or are there some very standardized ones?
Yeah, so there are categories of parts, and then there are parts that kind of fit within those categories, is kind of the way that I explain it. So I like to start with the categories and with the understanding that multiple parts can fit within these categories. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So if you want to bring up that slide, I can get into that.
Okay, let me bring that to the stage. Hopefully that will be visible for our viewers. Okay.
Yeah. So I just kind of created this diagram that I think is helpful. So the clouds are kind of like the symbol of the categories of parts. I guess I just thought of this. You could think of the parts as like raindrops within the cloud, but so the first category of part are the exiles. The first that I like to start with in explaining. So these are the parts of us that went through really painful experiences in the past and often in our childhood. And they took on, because of their experiences, they took on overwhelming feelings of maybe shame or grief, and possibly really painful beliefs about ourselves. Like if you were bullied and shamed, you might come to think, there's something wrong with me, or I'm a piece of crap, or whatnot. And so these parts are carrying then what we call burdens, and those burdens are those either painful beliefs or painful feelings that haven't been resolved. And so we try to avoid that pain because it's painful, and we're kind of just wired to avoid pain. And so, and also parts can be afraid that we'll be overcome by those feelings. We'll be like engulfed and never escape them. And so we try to put those in our subconscious, essentially. And so I've got this black line here as kind of like the subconscious barrier. And then other parts of us come in and they say, how can we avoid re-experiencing our trauma or re-experiencing those painful beliefs or what have you? And so these parts are proactive in trying to avoid those burdens that the exiles are carrying. And so the managers, by the way, did I mention, okay, so yeah, we send these exiles into exile. That's why we call them exiles. Okay. And then the managers are like managing our lives proactively so that we are behaving in ways that aren't going to activate our exiles. So that can look thousands of different ways. Just typical behaviors you see in people could be using pride as a strategy to avoid your shame. Could be people pleasing because you're afraid that if you don't please people, they'll get mad, and then you'll be brought back to that pain that the exiles are carrying. So all of these are proactive strategies that managers use in order to try to keep these exiles underneath the subconscious barrier.
So are there the things like, like I see shame and grief, and are those always considered exiles, or can they move to the management category, the manager's category, when they're acting properly? That's
a very good question. So try to answer it directly, because there's a few different directions I could go with that.
Just to clarify, like grief obviously is something which is a healthy, normal need. My father's in the process of dying, and I have to grieve that. I have to mourn that process, and that can either be done healthily or it can be done unhealthily. Shame is, I think, a good thing in a context of helping you to identify inappropriate social behaviors. So clearly there's ways for those things to not carry a negative connotation, I think.
Yeah. So we're getting into the weeds a little bit, but that's okay. So yeah. So like shame in this context, or the kind of the psychological definition that Brene Brown came up and seems to be kind of adopted pretty universally in psychology, is shame is the sense of, or actually she starts with guilt. Like guilt is the sense of I've done something bad. Shame is the sense of I am something bad.
Okay.
So it's a sense of if we're talking in Christian terms, it's a lie against the true sense of worth that God has installed in you. Okay. And so in that sense, you could differentiate it maybe by saying toxic shame or something like that. I think I've heard people say that. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at here when I've got shame down here in the exiles. Okay. And so it's usually a belief. It's a belief of I am fill in the blank. I am worthless, or people won't like me. Things along that line. That's kind of a universal belief about yourself.
So you don't have any positive things in the manager's category. What kinds of things would exist in that cloud?
Yeah. So going back to the no bad parts line is that the exiles are different than the burdens that they're carrying. So it's actually this might be another mistake people might make early on is thinking of our parts as just like feelings that we have or something like that. But our parts actually operate as like full sub-personalities. And they can be interacted with like we interact with people. So these exiles carry these beliefs, and then managers carry their management strategies. So I could have like typed in here, like what did I say earlier? Like people pleasing. So or let's see, rule following. So that's one that most people might see as a positive. But those would be strategies that the managers are using in kind of a rigid way. And that's kind of where managers can cause trouble, is because they can kind of be rigid about the way that they are protecting us from these exiles.
Okay.
Is that clear so far?
So I almost hear you saying that there are no bad parts, but it also appears to me that there are probably no holy parts. There are just parts that can operate good or bad and can get you in as much trouble as they can get you out of.
Yeah, they can certainly bring about. In fact, they often bring about the very things that they're trying to avoid.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you then do with this model of
yeah? So there's a little bit more. I just wanted to make sure that that you were. I'm making sense so far.
Sure.
So,
yeah. Absolutely.
So what happens sometimes is that something happens in our lives that triggers these exiles. Like maybe your manager has been rule following at work, and for no good reason, your boss gets mad at you, even though you've been following the rules. That might bring up that pain that an exile might have gone through previously in your life. And then that pain is back out in the open, and managers, they're very good at proactive managing, but they don't know what to do, or they don't have strategies for when the exiles get out. So then the firefighter parts come out. And this is the third and final category of parts. And so it's like when the exiles get past that subconscious barrier, it's like you could imagine like the house is caught on fire. And so the firefighters are just going to try to put that fire out no matter what the cost. Because to them, it's like, well, if the house is on fire, I'm not going to worry about maintaining the structural integrity of the building. I'm just going to make sure this fire doesn't spread. I'm going to make sure it goes out as fast as possible. So these might be things like alcohol to numb the pain, or lashing out. If you're in an argument with someone and they're saying things that are hurting you, that's when you might respond in a harsh way, and that would be like a firefighter trying to make the pain stop. And so once the firefighters have succeeded in bringing these exiles back down in the subconscious, the managers take back over, and we're back to kind of the status quo.
Okay.
Does that part make sense?
Sure does.
Okay.
So the firefighters are kind of a unique category apart from the managers and exiles.
Yeah, managers and firefighters are both protectors. The main difference between them is that managers' protection strategies are proactive and firefighter protective strategies are reactive.
Okay. And are there any things or systems that cross over between those different groupings?
Yeah, so these are helpful categories when you're first learning to understand what's happening. But then when we actually go in and start working with the parts, it becomes less important to put a label on them of like, this is a manager or this is a firefighter.
Okay. So it's a get you started framework.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What else do you need to show about this model?
Yeah. So then the question becomes like, how do we break out of these cycles of behavior that we're kind of stuck in? What we can do is it's kind of like whatever part of you are, we call it blended with, you're seeing the world through their eyes. And so it's kind of like they are the glasses, the lens that you're wearing. And so when we learn to notice these parts instead of just becoming them, then it's like you start to realize I'm wearing glasses. And then you start to be able to say to the part, would you be willing to like step back from me or give me space so that I can be with you? And then it's like you take the glasses off and you can see the glasses, and you can start, if my glasses could talk, I could start having a relationship with my glasses instead of just seeing the world through their eyes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So when our parts step back, it's like, this is why I have them as clouds, because it's like then the sun can come out. And the sun is what we call the self. And the reason it got called the self is just because when the founder of IFS, Richard Schwartz, was discovering it, he would ask these parts to step back, and then he would eventually inevitably get to this place where people would start feeling compassionate towards their parts or feeling curious about their parts.
Can you zoom in a little more on that?
Yeah.
Thanks.
And so these are he alliterated it into 8 C's, of curiosity, compassion, clarity, connectedness, confidence, creativity, calmness, and courage. And these are the traits that he would notice once people unblended from all their parts. And then he would ask, what part is this? And they would say, oh, this isn't a part of me. This is just me. And so he started calling this the self, though it's not like, you have to call it the self. Some people call it more of like an inner resource or self energy that we inhabit. More Christian leaning IFS people would maybe call it the spirit led self, the self that's led by the Holy Spirit. And so that's what comes out when we take all of the glasses off, or like if it's like Russian nesting dolls, you kind of take one off and until you get to the end where there's no more. That's what shows up when there's no more parts to step back or unblend.
Are these 8 characteristics, are they universally found, or are they a menu which some people are boosted in some areas and others?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they are, as far as I understand, they are universally found. They don't always show up all at once. So you might, when we're trying to access that self space of consciousness, you might notice curiosity, or you might notice compassion. And then sometimes, another one shows up. Maybe you notice courage, or you get more clarity on the situation. If it helps, actually, I have the definitions of the 8 C's. Do you think that would be helpful?
Probably overkill for the moment.
Makes sense.
What I'm wondering is it possible for that self-sun, if you will, to be somewhat masked or covered by the firefighters, by the managers?
Yeah.
So that bits of you are peeking out, but other parts are not.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is right. Yeah. Sometimes people might ask, like, am I in self, or am I not in self? And it's not really a all or nothing thing. It's often just kind of like, I've got 10% self, or whatnot. So yes, it can be like kind of like a mixture.
Okay, so I think that's a good broad overview. Then how do you go about leading someone through using this in a fruitful way?
Yeah. Yeah. So the first task is kind of introducing the self to the parts. So usually parts either don't trust the self or don't realize that it's there. And so starting the process of inviting these parts to step back or relax back to see what's underneath them. And then once someone shifts their consciousness into that state of curiosity and compassion, these things, then they can start to, the glasses analogy again, like speak to the parts inside of them, communicate with them, and show that curiosity and compassion and so forth. And that starts to help the parts to relax and build trust as like an inner leader of your system of parts. And then once the managers and firefighters trust the self, then they start to say, okay, I see what you're doing here. Maybe I'll let you pass this subconscious barrier and come and work with these exiles. And so once self comes down here to work with these exiles, that what's necessary for healing is pain to be witnessed in a compassionate way. And so self has that innate compassion. And so we can go to these exiles and witness what they went through. As it's kind of like you get one foot in the past and one foot in the present. And it's like you become what little you needed in that moment.
So I'm going to draw from my own history here for a moment and try and relate this. So I went through a process of counseling 2018, 2019, Prayers That Heal the Heart, Theophostic based. And I want to bring those up a little bit later, but I mention it now because one of the things that is specific to that methodology is, well, there's two things. One is, what are the lies that you believe about yourself, which I think ties very neatly to this exiles idea here.
Right.
And the two was, when in this Christian counseling context of the prayers that heal the heart, that basic methodology, a lot of the functionality of the counseling process was, let's invite Jesus into this memory and ask him, what were you doing there? What do you see? And then, once you deal with that, what is the truth that was happening? And so that, what you just said about when you bring the self down towards the exiles and be something being visible for the first time. I mean, that relates to me of, as a Christian, a very powerful idea of Jesus identifying with us. And that has much more than just, he died on the cross for us, or whatever Christianese evangelicals like to wrap around that. But that identification with us, I think, has something very powerful in this IFS motif, because when he becomes aware of those things, I think then that gives us that visibility at a very, very deep level that we would not otherwise have. And I think maybe that's part of what brings that that healing in that ministry model. Even though it's different than this one, I can see that the crossover.
It is very, you're right. It is pretty much, different categories, but pretty much doing the same thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So the self might invite the exiles to share what they went through, and be there as a comforting, compassionate presence. And the process is, there's different ways that the path goes, but it usually involves witnessing the pain and then inviting those exiles to release or unburden themselves of those burdens that they've been carrying.
Is it possible in this model, I realize this is a massive question, but is it possible to get to the point where there are no clouds anymore? Or what's the ideal end state if someone were perfectly free and whole? What would it look like in this picture? Yeah.
So it all of the clouds remain, but it would be so let's just kind of go through the process here of let's say someone has an exile that's carrying a burden of shame, of like, I am fundamentally flawed. I am fundamentally broken. And as a result, a manager has latched on to rule following in order to try and be perfect so that they can avoid feeling that shame. If self comes down here and heals the exile of that shame, the shame goes away. Now the strategy of protecting us from that shame is no longer necessary. And so, so now this would be like one of the raindrops, I guess, in the exile, but one of the exiles would now be freed up to be back in our conscious awareness, no longer trapped in the past. And the manager now is set free from its job. And usually the managers, they either don't like the jobs that they have to do, or they don't like the extent to which they have to do the job. And so that's part of why we say there's no bad parts, because even parts that are doing quote unquote bad things are doing it to prevent the pain of the exiles from getting out. And so the healed system, though, of course, nobody really gets there in this lifetime, is exiles freed from their burdens. So usually exiles, then they're like younger parts of us. And when we recover them, we get back in touch with a lot of like vitality, like childlike, joy and things like that. And so the ideal system would be a system of parts that are being led by the self, and parts that are no longer burdened by, lies about themselves or overwhelming emotions. And they're free to just pursue what they were designed to pursue.
So I imagine the model would be a mostly sunny day. There may be clouds, but they're not filled with raindrops. And you can go on with your life with the sun being the primary feature there.
Yeah. And I'd have to think about like how to analogize that, but yeah.
And so I imagine at some level, there's a cycle here where we see things break down a little bit and we start coping with something, and then there's something get exiled, and We have to go through this process on a regular basis to deal with whatever just popped up.
Yeah, and the more times self shows up, the more the parts trust the self, and the quicker they're ready to hand over the reins, I guess.
Sure. And in my case, even though it wasn't IFS, what I experienced was that I quickly began to recognize when God was pointing out something to me that, in this case, would be an exile thing, and the firefighter that was dealing with it. And it became very fast and easy to say, oh, I know how to deal with this. Just take a few minutes, process, pray, let God bring that into the light in this picture, and just have it released. And so it was it became a toolbox that I was able to use to recover quickly instead of having to wrestle for, years with the exile features.
Right. Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah. And I do think, like, just me personally, I think of self as having something to do with God. I don't know, I don't have an exact, how it works, but yeah, I think of it as something to do with our connection with God or the divine. And so
one of my questions was, how is self different, or is it different from the Imago Dei?
Yeah. Yeah. Like the original image of God placed in us. Is that what you mean? Yeah. Yeah. It very well may be that.
I mean, you described this, the 8 C words there as being fruits of the Spirit in a sense. So naturally, if that's the fruit of the Spirit, then that's a characteristic or a quality attribute that is godly. And so it seems to me that, that would represent those things.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And if God gave God's Spirit into us, then we should expect that to represent God's very nature.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So let's talk about resistance then. Are you done with that model?
Yeah, go ahead and you can take that off.
Okay. So talk to me for a moment about resistance and what that means in your context. That's a word I ran into when I was looking at this stuff ahead of time.
Yeah. So resistance is a sense of pushback. So like, that's why we talk about earning trust with the parts, because if you don't have trust, it's like, well, why am I going to let you do something that's potentially going to screw up this system that I've, come up with that keeps us from feeling the pain. And so it's really just parts trying to protect you is really what resistance is.
Are they protecting you, or are they protecting themselves? I mean, because if it's deeply embedded enough, then, as you said, without using the word pathology again, but when it is taken to extremes, they become more and more isolated and self-contained. Are they protecting their own existence? Does grief become its own thing that has to hold on to power, or is that a misunderstanding?
Parts do sometimes protect their own existence because of a fundamental misunderstanding of what we're trying to do.
Like, I have to be here to protect whatever.
Yeah. Or sometimes parts fear that if the burden is no longer there and they're no longer needed to do that job, that they'll be cast out or sent away or something like that. And so if there's a misunderstanding like that, there can be some resistance of a sense of like, I don't want to do this because that'll be the end of me. And if that's the case, then we reassure them that that's not what we're going for.
Okay. This question just occurred to me as you were talking. It's not something I front loaded, but I wonder if any of these things and how they work themselves out fit into this ancient idea of being demon possessed, which still certainly lingers today in certain circles very heavily. But the way these things react and push back against us, could those have been, or are they perceived sometime as being a demonic influence over us?
Yes. Yeah, and it's nuanced because there actually is a category in IFS for what Christianity might call demons. They call them unattached burdens.
Okay.
And so it does show up that there are UBs is the acronym for unattached burdens, and UBs they tend to, or inevitably, they have bad intentions for our system. And that's how we can kind of tease out the difference between parts and UBs is like, what is your intention behind what you're doing? So to get back to your question, sometimes, demon possession might have been parts being mistaken. And sometimes it may have been actual demons, I guess you could say.
Spiritual entities or spiritual influences. Yeah. And I certainly don't discount them. I have, on the other hand, learned that I think we sabotage ourselves by giving way more permission or weight or gravitas to things external to us.
Yeah.
And
interesting.
A lot of the time we're not willing to take accountability for our own foolishness and life happens, and we have to pin that on some spiritual force. And I think sometimes we way overdo that. Yeah.
So like projecting, that's another thing we often do, or parts often do, is like, if something is, it's like something we don't want to acknowledge about ourselves, we project it onto someone else.
Or something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So a little bit of a gear shift here. I want to compare IFS, and I've already touched on it, like theophostic prayer, prayers of the heal the heart, some inner healing things. I don't know if you're familiar with John and Paula Sanford.
No.
Way back in the early 90s, the older books that talked about healing the inner heart. How is IFS related or different than some of those other Christian models?
Well, I'm not intimately familiar with all of those other models.
Sure.
I have the basic understanding of theophostic prayer that you were describing, and as we were saying, it seems like very similar. And I did get into at one point this thing called the Emmanuel approach. Have you heard that? It's pretty similar to theophostic prayer, and it's a lot of like inviting Jesus to come and minister to you, basically. And created by a psychiatrist, I think, or psychologist, Carl Lehman. And yeah, it seems like a great method that I've used sometimes.
I think maybe what I'm hearing based on everything we've talked about is that these methods each invite us to understand something deep within us, and more than that, the Christian ones specifically invite God or Jesus or whatever manifestation of the divine we want to call it to be the one that prompts our thinking as we understand ourselves better. So, the theophostic or the prayers that heal the heart was specifically about, let's invite Jesus into this conversation about what's going on deep within us and into our memories and where those things may have come from.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a uniquely Christian part of it, but I don't know. One of the things I've started to maybe shift a little bit in my theological understandings over the last few years is we tend to put God language on things that are natural. And so sometimes but with that said, I think in my understanding of the divine, God will work with us in whatever framework and language we choose to come to God with, because God is more interested in our healing and in our salvation, not in the eternal sense, but in our bringing salvation to us in our current world.
Yeah.
And so if we want to use evangelical language, if we want to use theophostic language, if we want to use IFS language, God will meet us in those things with our intent to approach for healing. And so at some level, I'm not really bothered by calling any one of them better than another, because I think they all work.
Yeah. In as much as they tap into whatever, whatever this truth is of the divine, they all essentially get you to the same place, I think.
Okay. How does the Christian concept of grace play into all of this with IFS?
Good question. Could you say more about what you mean when you say the Christian concept of grace?
Sure. I mean, grace is undeserved, unmerited favor from God to us. And is there a crossover at all between that and the understanding of the systems, or is it just because you're talking about how the things in exile kind of subversively jump up to the surface and try and take over, and then the firefighter has to deal with that to get back to handing control to the managers and all this obscure self. But grace, I think, in my Christian journey, one of the biggest steps was finally beginning to understand the idea that God was not after my soul to send it to hell if I didn't get things right, and that God was comfortable with me as a person. And how I assign the genesis of that, I guess, is that because Jesus died on the cross for me, or is that just God's very nature to have that for me? Frees me from spending a lot of time antagonizing myself or being angsty with myself over what isn't perfect. And so it opens up for me the pathway to just move on from things because I don't really believe I'm a bad person. So, those things, does that play into IFS then when you bring in that kind of a concept play into when you're counseling someone?
Yeah. It certainly can be helpful if, for instance, if a Christian is coming into therapy and their managers have internalized this sense of I am bad, or they have a burden of I am bad. Approaching their parts that they may see as bad with compassion. Sort of citing grace as, well, if God treats you with grace, then don't you think we should treat you with grace? Can be a useful kind of lever to pull. Okay. But I like just kind of getting a little bit more specific about the language of grace. Like, I prefer unearned favor to undeserved favor, because like if God says something is true, who's to say it's not deserved?
Sure.
So yeah,
that's a great corrective. That's a great corrective.
I think the favor is very much deserved, not because we've earned it. That's why I like unearned favor, because we don't have to do anything to earn it, but we deserve it simply because God says we do.
Yeah, and if you really, one of the changes in my theology was getting to this point of really believing that I'm not the worm that needs to go to hell. That God, if God truly deposited something of God's self in me and said, this is good, which God did, right? Then it's there. I don't need to spend a lot of time fretting about whether it's there or not. I just have to learn to access or appropriate, or those are Christian words for it, I guess. But, to just admit that to myself. Yeah. Okay. What about the doctrine of sin? Does that play into this at all?
Yeah. So I guess I kind of harmonize it, though I don't really feel the need to abide by the doctrine of sin. But the way I harmonize it is that if sin is missing the mark being godly behavior or godly.
That self-son in the middle, right?
Yeah. And so sin is just missing the mark of that. And the reason for sin is not because we are inherently evil or inherently sinful. It's because our protector parts don't see any other option until they're set free from those illusions that they don't have another option.
Okay.
I like Dallas Willard. I read one time, he said, someone asked him, do you believe in total depravity? And he said, I believe in enough depravity. And I liked that like, it's depravity, but it's not out of a wicked heart. It's out of a self-protective mechanism that doesn't see that you have a better option.
What about repentance? When you recognize these things, does that facilitate, that concept of repentance, does that facilitate the clearing away of the things from in front of self, or to get things back out of the firefighter mode into the exile mode? Or?
Correct me if I'm wrong. The word for repentance, is it metanoia, or am I getting that wrong?
That sounds close enough to what I've heard.
Okay. So like that concept is to like turn and change your thinking. I think. I might be getting that from Ted Decker.
Whether or not it's the right Greek word, that certainly is the idea.
So yeah, like, and then this whole process is the process of repentance. This is how we turn and change our thinking.
As soon as we recognize that God has given us a different understanding or different framework or whatever, then we can intellectually change directions.
Yeah. So like the thinking being that I am bad, or I am the worm, or the thinking then being from the managers, I have to act in this certain way in order to avoid the pain, or from firefighters, I have to put out the fire by doing things that are quote unquote sinful. And all of that thinking can change when the exiles are freed of their burdens.
Yeah. That was a fundamental shift for me when I abandoned thinking about repentance as stopping a behavior. But when I started understanding it as a mental adjustment. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree.
So where do you see IFS going, say, the next 5 to 10 years? What's its future? It's
a very it's a growing phenomenon. Like it started in the 80s and it's been growing since then. The trainings are so hard to get into. I had to wait 4 years to get into a training because of the demand. So yeah, it's very much like growing, and people are more and more talking about it. Like I just heard that, I don't know who Mark Maron is, but one of my clients listens to their podcast, and apparently it's very well known, and they just had someone on there talking about IFS, and so yeah, it's definitely growing in awareness, and I guess hopeful parts of me hope that it can be a part of bringing about healing and change in the world. Okay, and because it's becoming so popular, I guess more and more people are starting to become aware of it, and I feel like, having had the conversation last time with you and then this extension, I have enough of a sense of the meaning to concatenate the ideas that I'm hearing from externally with what I've learned about it. What do you then, or any other professional counselor that uses IFS, bring that someone like me just sitting in my living room asking God what's going on? Where does the counseling model fit into that to actually bring healing? Yeah. I like that question. And it's also, IFS has kind of gone beyond just being a therapy model into like like some people say it's like their version of spirituality. And like there are aspects of it that we haven't covered in here that actually do kind of dip into the spiritual. Yeah, so like non-counselors can do IFS as well. Like some people that don't have counseling licenses get certified in IFS. And people can do it on their own too. Like it's not like you have to come to me or some IFS therapist to try it. There are books called like self-therapy that kind of provide prompts and journaling stuff to kind of like try IFS out on your own. So yeah, with that said, what a therapist brings is more self-energy in the room. So like, okay, we therapists, when we're trained to do IFS, we're trained to help our parts step back from us so that we can access that self. And so that then it's like self calls out the other self. So my recollection of going, I took a couple church-led classes in prayer ministry, the Theophostic or transformational prayer ministry. And my experience was having the head knowledge about it was helpful, but trying to apply that to myself in real time was always fraught because, my brain starts going off on a rabbit trail and then I'm blaming something, and I was, or as opposed to the counselor sitting with me and guiding me back onto that pathway constantly and giving me the right prompts at the right moment. Not that the knowledge was any different. Right.
but she knew intimately how to bring that to the table at the right moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that was the real value that in that, and it sounds like that's probably similar here.
Yeah. And there's also a really common experience that I had, which is that we have parts of us that hear about the self and they're like, oh, that's the right thing to do, so I'm going to do that. And then it's like, we call them self-like parts because sometimes they think they are the self. I have a figure for mine right here is Julian Bashir from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. That's what my self-like part shows up as when I imagine him. So I have had to learn to recognize him and then help him step back from me, so that I can operate as like that true, genuine curiosity and compassion that I'm not having to put in effort to feel those things. It just flows naturally.
Early in my counseling, the Lord led me to a vision of myself that was so potent to me that I bought a 3D printer, printed a statuette. It's right in front of me. I just don't want to stand up and reach it. That sitting there in front of me reminds me of who God told me that I was, that I just need to hold on to that thing and let that help, So it's just a little visual reminder to me. So
yeah,
sounds kind of similar for you.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I keep them right here, and I have other ones too to represent my other parts, to give a visual representation. It can be helpful to kind of externalize our parts for some people. For some people, it works well to just kind of like imagine them inside. Other people, it helps to have like visuals outside of them to kind of say like, this is me and this is them. Okay.
So where do people go to get this kind of counseling? Would they visit their local? I mean, is there a directory of people who do this kind of ministry? Or
there is. It's it is the IFS Institute. So trying to think of what the website is. Maybe we could put it in the show notes or something.
Sure, yeah, if you get that to me.
Yeah, there's a website for what's called the IFS Institute, and they have a directory on there.
Okay. And is your counseling business purely local, or is it something that people can contact you separately to connect?
Yeah. So the way that licensing works in the United States is that we are licensed to work with people who live in the state that we're licensed in.
Okay.
And so I am currently licensed in Illinois and Indiana. So I can work with anybody that lives in those states.
Okay. But finding them through the IFS Institute for another one would be pretty straightforward.
Yeah, they're all over the place. So it's it's not like they're impossible to find.
So that makes me wonder, if you go pick a place that offers IFS counseling, does that mean that's the only type that they offer, or will they bring to you a menu and say, well, let's use this for this purpose and this?
Depends on the counselor. Every counselor comes into their practice with kind of their own blend. Okay. Some people are purists and they just stick to one. Some people they kind of like have a more eclectic blend. So it really depends on the counselor.
Okay. Well, this has been great. I really feel like I have a better understanding, and I hope that the people that get a chance to watch or listen to this will grab hold of it and find some value in it.
Yeah, me too.
So I wanted to take a quick diversion. You're part of a band, and you told me about that, and I went and listened to it, and actually ended up re-listening to it, which is pretty rare for me to take a second pass through something like that.
Thank you.
And had that playing while I was working on Tile last week. And
nice.
So tell me a little bit more about how you got into that, what part you play in it, and how long you've been doing that.
Yeah. So I guess technically I'm in two bands, though it's not like, that's not some impressive thing. So my friend Josh Savage and I are doing a band we call Ancient Summer. And I'm not sure which one you were listening to, that one. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So we've released one album under Ancient Summer, and we've actually just started working on the second album, which I'm really excited about. The first album was kind of like a backlog of songs that he had written and never produced. And the second album is more songs that we're kind of writing currently.
Okay.
So that's Ancient Summer. And then the second band is, I call it the Midwestern Confession. which I'm pretty proud of that name because like the wordplay on Westminster Confession.
Yeah.
And also it's kind of like a confession of former conservative Christian, I guess. I don't know. But it's very much kind of my lane there that I'm taking is just kind of trying to point out places in the Bible where the Bible is saying, "Hey, you're doing something bad, conservative Christians." So it's kind of more along those lines. That's Ancient Summer is much more subtle in its lyrics, and Midwestern Confession is very not subtle.
I'll have to go listen to the Midwestern one. The Ancient Summer was fun because it's a genre of music I don't typically gravitate towards, but as I've been deconstructing over the last few years, I found myself exceedingly uncomfortable with a lot of the stuff that I used to just worship to worshiping.
Yeah.
I was slavishly devoted. And I led music worship for 15 years as a worship leader. And I played for probably 40 years on worship teams. And so stepping away from a lot of that music, I was listening to Shane and Shane the other day and struck by how many of the lyrics just really make me twitch these days.
Yeah.
Even as they're very comfortable and familiar.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah.
But this Ancient Summer stuff was like, there's a lot of neat little hooks in there that grabbed me and didn't trigger me. So that was kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I will put links to both of those. What part do you play in this? You keyboard, drums, what?
Yeah. So I am a average guitarist and a below average pianist. Okay. But I am sort of my main role is producer. Okay. So I'm good with the mixing and coming up with like some like stuff to fill in the musical landscape.
So is it just two of you?
Yeah, just the two of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does he do the drums?
We use the Logic drummer.
Okay.
It's actually a really great.
My son's been doing a lot of music production, and some of it's stunningly good. So, that's pretty cool. I, as you probably see over my shoulder, a keyboard player for long time, and I play at the bass. I tell people, but I was part of a Christian rock band for a few years. We did all originals, and I missed that vibe.
Nice.
And one of the things, stepping away from the institutional church largely, kind of pulled me back from almost weekly involvement in a group, a music group, and that's been a shocking change.
I miss that too. I used to be in the church band as well.
Looking back on it, I'm just struck by the evangelical institutional. I forget the term for it. The evangelical industrial complex, and all the let's make things monetized at any turn that we can, and looking at how these large worship groups, Vineyard and who else, Bethel and groups like that, are just like monetizing the snot out of worship, and some of these indie things just feel so much more genuine to me today.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. I will provide links on the show notes to those because I think people ought to hear that stuff.
Thanks. Yeah.
Well, this has been a ton of fun. I very much appreciate your time today.
Thanks. I've had fun too.
All right. Let's talk again sometime.
Okay. Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, that was fun. Andy was a pleasure to speak with. He does a great job of explaining concepts and helping to contextualize them. Honestly, I feel like he could have legitimately charged me for an introductory counseling session today. If you're like me, using IFS as a framework for exploring and healing our inner workings could be transformative, and it'll benefit us and those who have to live with us. Be sure to check out the show notes for the links that we discussed. Andy and his band partner made some great music, and I think you'll enjoy it. And if this discussion helped you out, I'd really appreciate a like and a share. As a small channel, we don't show up in many YouTube searches, and every interaction from those who watch us is helpful. Thanks for spending some time with me today, and we'll talk again soon. Be blessed.